Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two mental health professionals sit down and talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. We'll get into how we connected. Today, my guest is Jenn Sowers. Jenn, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to share the story of how we connected?
Sure. I take health insurance, and Jeremy, I guess you don't.
I do not,
Um,
no.
but somehow these big health insurance companies that have all sorts of checks and balances in place sent me a piece of paper for wellness with Jer instead of wellness with Jenn. Um, and so I looked you up and I was like, hey, who's this person so that I can let them know in case this is something you need to follow up on. Um,
Yeah.
and then the rest is history, I guess. Yeah.
It's such absurdist type connection that I couldn't pass it up to be like, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? This is a really funny thing. Yes, these billion-dollar insurance companies can't figure out wellness with Jer versus wellness with Jenn. So
Mhm.
we have that instant connection, naming our practices in a very clever way.
Yeah. Across many state lines, too, you'd think.
Yeah, literally, for our wonderful listeners, nothing else in common, not the same
Yeah.
state, no zip code, no numbers or street, nothing was the same, just Jer versus Jenn.
Yep.
So that is what your insurance premiums are paying for, y'all. That's why I don't take insurance. One of many reasons why I don't take insurance.
Mhm.
Jenn, I always like to start with how'd you get into the mental health field? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll just take it all the way back to even when I was a kid. There were opportunities, even in my elementary school, to volunteer at a local school for special education. And I took those opportunities and got super into it. In high school, I did my volunteer hours at the same school that I did some work with in elementary school. And at that point, I took a psychology course, then AP psychology in high school, fell in love, couldn't resist, went to University of Maryland, got my bachelor's in psychology, searched around, ended up deciding on social work because you can do so many different things with it, not just therapy. And at the time, I was interested in really intensive work, working with inpatient or crisis situations, schizophrenia, psychosis, bipolar. Um, and it was just something that working in those realms really clicked with me and the energy aligned. And I really loved it. After like 8 years of doing it, we hit a global pandemic, and burnout is a real thing, especially, in the therapy field. Things are hard in hospitals in a pandemic. It's not the most enjoyable or helpful experience to be living in. So then I got into private practice therapy and working for myself. So there wasn't so much oversight. I didn't have to listen to bosses. Um,
Yeah,
and so that's like the brief but long version of how I got into therapy in the mental health field. I had my own experiences with my own mental health too that have kind of shaped my journey as well,
sure.
helped me get here.
Yeah. A lot of my guests, especially in the social work side of things, talk about getting burned out, but it sounds like you had a pretty good run. 8 years is beyond what we kind of in the field joke about is that like 5 year burnout point. So like you got past that. It took a global pandemic to burn you out.
I did, and part of the strategy even within that, 8 years or so was that when I would burn out at one job, I'd find another job that was similar in the
Right.
field with a different organization, and that was super helpful for me because I usually was not burnt out of working with the clients or patients or individuals. Usually, it was the business aspect,
Yeah.
that wore me down, and from what I hear, wears many social workers down at the very least.
Yeah, and it's hard, I think, to be in a service-minded field in a capitalistic, for-profit society where you see a lot of people who are in crisis or in high need in the hospital settings, but also they are very low resourced for the most part. And so it's this, I don't know, this juxtaposition that doesn't work real well. And
Yeah.
we as therapists, social workers, helpers in general have to kind of balance that
Yeah.
queasiness about it.
Definitely, definitely. And another thing, in that time period for me in that experience, I moved state to state, which also gives a really unique perspective to see how different states are handling mental health and
Hmm.
where each state is allocating finances or what kind of like step down units they have. It's so different across the country. It makes it very interesting.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
learning experience too.
Well,
Yeah.
and different from provider experience too. I think in network, out of network, if you're a big healthcare industry like Wisconsin, which is where I'm at, has three different big hospital organizations, and like they're different. Like they have a different vibe. So if you're with Aurora or if you're not, like that's different. If you're at the medical college or you're at one of the for-profit hospitals, it's a different vibe. So state to state is funded differently, and then these corporations are also funded differently.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah. So what was the pandemic? Okay, that says a lot. But what was the journey into private practice? Because I like to highlight people who are in private practice, and hear other people's experiences. Because sounds like you were in the field for a long time before you took that jump. Similar experience on my end, where I was coming out of the pandemic and leaving higher ed and then getting back into private practice before launching my own. So what
Mm.
was it about the pandemic and then kind of getting into your own space? What was that like?
Yeah, so, the pandemic hit, I was working inpatient psych at a place that I really enjoyed working, but again, the resources, policy changes, things like that are hard, and then just I mean, it was a global universal trauma to go through COVID, we all experienced it, um and that was hard. I came out of it and I was like, well, first of all, I got my LCSWC, so I was fully licensed at that point, and I was like, I just can't. I need to try something different,
Hmm.
which again, I've changed jobs a lot. So I thought I was just gonna change jobs again. Um, and I was like, well, let me take a travel social work job across the country in Colorado and just do that for 4 months or so, see if that refreshes me, kinda resets my mind, and gets me ready to go back into another hospital or crisis field of some sort. So I went, I did the stint of travel social work, came back, and I thought about getting a job, and I was just like, "I can't. I can't do this right now. I mentally am not able to handle this."
Hmm.
And one of my friends had or 2 of my friends had a private practice that they were hiring someone part-time. And so I was kinda like, "All right, let me give this a try. I can do a couple hours a week while I get my head back on my shoulders, facing forward in any kind of reasonable way."
Yeah.
Um, and then I'll go back into a quote, unquote, "real job." At a real business, whatever that even means, and just continue private practice on the side. But then I enjoyed it, and I didn't get to a point, even now, where I felt like I could mentally handle the bureaucracy and the capitalism and those things in
Hmm.
big business. Um, and so here I am after a year and a half working with them. I transitioned fully to my own private practice.
Yeah.
Um, and have just been cultivating that since.
Yeah. This is a personal curiosity.
Mhm.
What was the business background that you had in that? Was that like a thing that you joined this other practice and were like, oh, I could do this? Or was it something that you had been thinking about for a while?
Actually, if you had ever asked me, even up to 4 years ago, 3 years ago when the pandemic hit, anything, I would have told you, I will never ever go into private practice. I'll never own my own business. I don't want to do individual therapy. I thought that was off the table for me, honestly. It didn't seem
Yeah.
like something that would interest me. And, you know, that's why I try different things is find out it does interest me.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I was with them, and really what it came down to is I realized I don't think I'm gonna be able to go back to a job where there's so much oversight and there's so many politics around it. I just don't think
Mhm.
that's in the cards for me. And working for another private practice where you're getting a certain percentage of the income you bring in wasn't financially feasible.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm enjoying this work. I can't imagine myself working for someone else right
Mhm.
now, or in the near future. So let's give this a shot.
Yeah.
As long as I like it, let me give this a shot.
Yeah, that sounds like such a lovely, peaceful journey. I'm sure there was more stress to it than that. My experience is everything went wrong, and I finally got to a point where it's like everyone else keeps screwing this up. Maybe I should just do it myself. Because similarly, I didn't want to do. I thought like the business side of it would be very unwieldy.
Mhm,
I don't have any business training, and so I was like, I can't do this. I have ADHD. I'm not going to be able to balance stuff, and like getting into that space, be like, oh, this is how I always wanted to practice. Like it's, I get to do things in a way that are genuine and authentic to me, and that shows up differently to my clients then. And so, yeah, I'm always curious to hear the journey because I think so many of us get here by various routes.
mhm, yeah.
So, you have some specific niche areas of expertise that I want to dig into. Um, One of the things you do is nature therapy, ecotherapy. I always have to watch myself on some of these things because they're certified and they mean specific things.
Mhm.
But share with us kind of the background in nature therapy and that ecotherapy. When did you pick that up in the chronology, and kind of where was that interest for you?
Yeah, so I'm certified in nature-informed therapy through the Center for Nature-Informed Therapy, which is in North Baltimore. It's a division of the Chesapeake Mental Health Collaborative, um, created by Heidi, who has her PhD in nature therapy and has done a lot of great research, written some great books. So I really found that organization again as I was transitioning into my own private practice and away from the practice that I was in once I finally decided this is what I want to do. I also knew I can't sit and look at a screen all day,
Yeah.
and I don't have an office. I wasn't that interested in getting an office, but I love to hike. I love to be outside. And so I started thinking, like, this has to be a thing. Nature has to be good for your mental health, right? Like, it is for me, I know that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started researching different organizations, and luckily, I'm in Baltimore, and the Center for Nature Informed Therapy is also in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Um, and and so I reached out to them and I looked at their trainings and I just signed up, because I knew I couldn't do therapy in private practice and run my own business without getting outside
Mhm.
and being with people and moving. Those are things that are super important to me. Um, and so I wanted to be able to share them and to learn more about it. And I didn't feel comfortable just doing that without knowing some of the research behind it
Yeah.
and dealing with some of the, technicalities of what this would be like. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you have like some paradigm shift in that? I know I was straight counseling the whole time I was in school, so I kind of had that background. But like, there are so many rules and regulations that kind of had to deprogram myself from like, oh, you can't take your client outside because what if they see someone they know, and then what about their confidentiality, and like all these things that were legalistic in nature and not client centered at all. So what was there some deprogramming for you coming out of your training or your hospital stays that you had to deal with, or was it like easy shift?
Yeah, so I am big on, like, worrying about liability in all those ways that you just mentioned, and that's part of why, before the training, I tried to be like, "Okay, I can do this. This makes sense. There has to be a way to safely do this." But I was way too scared.
Hmm.
Luckily, this organization, when you go to their 3-day intensive training and the, couple months of supervision afterwards, they talk about that. It's
Yeah.
in the slides to talk about liability, to talk about, insurances, to talk about how to talk about clients and risks of being outside,
Hmm.
risks of injury, seeing people you or they know. Um, so that was part of why I signed up for the training, was to get something more official.
Yeah. And
Um,
then you don't have to reinvent the wheel and create something that somebody else already did all the work for.
right, yeah. People have already been using consent forms and assessment
Yeah.
tools that, seem to be working, so that was
Yeah.
helpful for me, and once I had that, and once I had the training, I felt pretty comfortable, just going into it.
Yeah. What has been the response from clients and people who are interested in it when you tell them, this is what I do, this is how I operate? Are people looking for that specifically, or is it some explanation and kind of that, I don't know, elevator pitch? I don't like that phrase, but like, do you have to pitch them on it, or is it like, no, people are searching you out because they want it?
I would say some of each. I
Okay.
do get a decent number of clients that reach out to me because they see on my website or my Psychology Today profile, I don't have some formal headshot. It's just me standing on top of a mountain in my, like, vest and hiking gear and my
Yeah.
backpack. Um, so some people do see that and see, how I describe nature therapy briefly in those pages, and they do reach out to me just for that reason.
Mhm.
Other people will reach out and I'll pitch to them, like, here are the things I do. I do virtual therapy, I use acceptance and commitment therapy, and I do nature therapy. If you'd like to meet outside, these are kind of the days and times.
Mhm.
And some people are like, "Ooh, that sounds great, let's do it." And other people are like, I'm not sure."
Yeah.
In which case we just meet virtually. Nature-informed therapy is something I bring into virtual sessions as well, so there's not really an escaping it.
Yeah.
Um, but it just the response kind of varies, and then sometimes it's timing also. It gets dark really early now,
Mhm.
so if people wanna meet after work hours, I can't meet with them outside after work. It's dark
Yeah. Right.
already. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And cold. I mean, Maryland is not a super warm zone.
Yeah, it is cold, but that's also kind of a useful piece of nature therapy is, we want distress tolerance in our life in general.
Mhm.
Cold is a slightly more simple way of, you know, practicing distress tolerance. We're out
Sure.
here. We're gonna sit here or walk out here and experience a little distress, and that's actually part of the process of nature therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so lovely. Um, it's so interesting to see. I'm biased, I guess, because we're all in our own little echo chambers, but seeing how many people are using nature as a grounding technique, whether in session or just kind of as homework for clients to work on, spend more time in nature, and then all the metaphors that it provides for us, the changing of the seasons, how we can talk about being cold as distress tolerance, and like, oh, yeah, that's such an obvious mental health connection, but that's not something that I would say psychology as a whole normally like portrays it as. So I think it's fascinating to see a lot of people are connecting with nature. Do you feel like that's at all coming out of the pandemic where we were all kind of locked down, or do you feel like that's a response to tech taking over our lives? Like, what do you kind of see working in this field?
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine it's all of the above. The pandemic did cause a shift, even in that it got people even more hooked on technology,
Hmm.
working from home. Now you have no social connection, no interpersonal connection, no connection at work with colleagues. Um, and you're just at home alone staring at a screen. And I don't think people realize the extent of, I don't know, the impact that has on mental health.
Hmm.
And when you look at nature and you look how humans evolved in and with nature prior to the Industrial Revolution, some 200, 300 years ago, something around there, um, what we're doing right now is so unnatural for
Yeah.
our humanity, for how we evolved. Um, and so I do think that the pandemic had an influence. Technology definitely has an influence. Um, and some people are more ready than others to get back out in nature and find
Yeah.
different ways to connect.
Yeah. I think the pandemic's interesting too, because we also know things like bike sales went through the roof, and like
Mm,
people were kind of frantic to get out at one point. And so, getting bikes or going hiking, like some of those things, technology invaded our personal home life in a way that it hadn't before. And there was also this push to get outdoors that was kind of associated with it as people learned it was safe to be outside and wanted to engage in some of those outdoor activities.
right. Even just hanging out with friends, you could no longer hang out at a restaurant or in
Mhm.
enclosed spaces. And so it got people in this kind of, I got to go outside if I want to see people.
Yeah. So it sounds like nature for you was always there, and
Mhm.
then it was figuring out how to tie the therapy part into what for you has always been very important.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, nature's been a huge part of my life forever. I mean, there've been times where I wasn't doing much with nature. I wasn't going outside that much or hiking that much, but it was always really important to me, and I always felt connected to nature.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was definitely part of my life. I'm big on hiking. I play soccer. I do a lot of things outside, and that's always kind of been one of my threads is just get out there.
Yeah. Do you find a lot of clients are already there, or they're looking to kind of reconnect, or both? I keep asking all these both questions.
Yeah, yeah, and I think probably most of the time the answer will be both in these
Yeah.
kinds of questions. Um, yeah, I guess it does depend. There are, again, clients that seek me out because I do this work.
Hmm.
And there are also clients that I see that most of them I'm still virtual with, but they come to me and they're like, "I do not like nature. I don't wanna go outside." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Okay, let's start there then."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I chuckle when you said you bring it into session anyway. As a marriage therapist, I've used gardening, and I'm a terrible gardener. Like my wife would be like, Jeremy cannot grow things. Um, Pumpkins grow really well in our climate against my will because they take over everything. But I use gardening as this analogy of like healthy tending to your relationship, and like it's a maintenance. We have to weed, and we have to make sure our soil's good, and we have to get the rocks out, and like for good stuff to grow, we have to put in all this work. And like that analogy, that metaphor makes so much sense to people that I do think there's an intuitive aspect to using nature and some of the lessons it provides for our mental health.
Yeah, nature metaphors are such a huge part of it. And they're definitely easy to do when you're actually outside in nature and
Mhm.
you're talking about grief and you see a tree that's fallen. And you can talk about where that tree came, what its life was, how it fell, and how it's now nurturing the earth.
Yeah.
It's not gone. Its energy will never be gone. Energy doesn't disappear. It just gets transferred to the next thing. So things like that, and
Mhm.
metaphors with the seasons and nature hibernating right now during the winter. I have this on my mind so much and have really been embracing winter and slowing down and hibernating and,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. there's this large disconnect for culture at large, I would say, of nature. It's just kind of produce and be success, the grind culture, as it were, of like everything's the same all the time, regardless of what's going on around us. And so there is a disconnect, I think, with the changing of the seasons and being okay with that.
Mhm.
Um, and so much of what we're doing, as you said earlier, is just unnatural to what our bodies were built for, and our brain being part of our bodies being built for not concrete, not 24/7 social media consumption, not capitalism. Like
Right.
some of this structure that we exist in is not what our body's designed for.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll give you even another example because to me, when I talk about nature therapy, it naturally brings up a lot with evolution and how our bodies are. And so if you think of an animal or ourselves in fight or flight mode when there was an animal attacking us,
Hmm.
your visual field, your eyes kind of come inward, and there's this direct focus. They narrow in towards your nose and they look directly at the thing that's a threat. And there's a feedback loop in our mind and our body. When our eyes do that, it tells our brain, danger, danger, fight or flight. And look at us right now. These screens are right in front of us. Look
Hmm.
how my eyes are. They are coming in at that same way. So when we're looking at phones, computers, things that are super close to our face all day, our eyes are telling our brain, panic, something's wrong,
Yeah.
danger. And so things like that are really easy to bring in to nature
Mhm.
therapy virtually
Yeah.
without being like, love the trees, and which I do, like, I love the trees, but, you gotta meet clients where they're at,
Yeah.
and almost everyone, maybe actually everyone in this culture and society can relate to, "Oh, yeah, I do look at things really close to my face for hours and hours on end."
Yeah. With bright lights that signal to our brain that it needs to be alert. Yeah. There's so much that goes into that. And I love this analogy. I use a similar one when I'm teaching people about their stress response of like, what's a saber-toothed tiger in our society now?
Mhm.
Because so few of us have threats that are hardwired in, our brain goes and finds them. They search out things to be concerned about. So what if our boss is mad at us? What if someone doesn't like the email we send? And like that's such a stupid, silly thing for our brain to be panicked about. But when we're living in a fairly secure society where our danger is not naturally at risk that often, our safety is not at risk that often, our brain reprocesses some of these things as threats that wouldn't make sense as a threat at all in a different context.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like I'm that person who doesn't want to ever talk on the phone. So like again, I'm not throwing shade at anyone. I pace while I'm on the phone because it stresses me out.
Yes.
Um, so there's this disconnect from nature, and for a lot of people, getting that back is helpful, not just in a metaphorical sense, but in a like grounding, connecting back to your environment, being much more authentic and genuine than the dystopia that we've kind of built around ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you say these things and my mind goes in like 20 different directions. Every time a client talks about these things, my mind goes like, okay, which is the like direction I'm going to chase down? Am I going to talk about distress tolerance and how nature can help? Am I going to talk about connection
Mhm.
and how lonely it is to live in a concrete box and only interact with people when our schedules align or whatever the case may be?
Right.
Versus a really genuine connection with nature, with trees. Again, this is where we came from.
Hmm.
We relied on the land to support us. I mean, we still do, we just don't pay attention to that because we are not the ones gardening, for example,
Or
or
gardening poorly.
or gardening poorly. Someone else is doing that piece, so we don't see that connection, but it used to be we had to work with and for nature. And there was a really authentic connection
Mhm.
And even now, that can decrease loneliness and improve your mood to connect with nature authentically, have a reciprocal relationship with nature. We get from nature food, you know, ways to regulate our nervous system.
Mhm.
And we can also give back to nature, picking up litter, tending to a garden, whatever the things may be, the ways that we choose to interact with nature.
Yeah. Yeah. I have ADHD, and so I've always said fire and water, even before I had my diagnosis or really understood my diagnosis, were very like calming to me, and I didn't understand why. I thought I just liked fire and water, but it's that constant stimulation that goes on. These are things that are never moving; they never sit still, and for my brain, like that soothes me. I need a certain level of stimulation for my brain to be able to focus elsewhere. And so nature is one of those things, water and fire specifically for me, but like even going for a hike, going through the woods, there's so much stimuli going on that the best VR headset, the best video game is trying to replicate
Mhm,
nature. Like that's for the video game culture, like, oh, the leaves are really realistic or the water's really realistic. Like they're trying to capture that sense that you get being out in nature because our brain is wired to respond to it.
mhm. Yeah, the fractal patterns in nature, the, like, shapes of the leaves, when you look up at the canopy, those are things that they find looking at those things helps our mental health. Seeing the colors blue and green, just that alone helps your mental health. Those
Mhm.
are the soothing colors. They're the natural, like, in the span of our vision, the colors that humans can see, blue and green are the soothing colors. Nature patterns are soothing. Kids who spend time in nature, kids with ADHD who spend time in nature, if they've been outside for, I think it was like 20 minutes or something, I don't remember actually the numbers off the top of my head, but given a task that requires focus, they're better at it after they've been in nature for 20 minutes compared to a control group that's been inside or doing other things for 20 minutes before the focus task.
Yeah. Yeah, which opens up a whole separate box about our education system. But like, my wife's a teacher, so I'll speak on this a little bit. Um, what happens when a kid's misbehaving? A kid who maybe is undiagnosed ADHD or just didn't get a good night's sleep or didn't have breakfast, they get their recess taken away. And then what happens throughout the day? Like their behavior gets worse instead of better because what they need is stimulation. What they need is dopamine. What they need is a connection somewhere, and we're taking it away, putting them in a sterile classroom environment.
Oof, yeah.
And two, I mean, you have this experience working in the hospital setting, like this very dry, white, sterile approach to things that isn't at all what our brain is wired to feel comfortable in.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
clean. I put
Yeah.
that in quotes. It's a podcast. People can't see me. It's clean. It gives the illusion of being sterile, but like
Mhm.
again, that's not how we're super wired either. It's good if you're doing surgery, but recovery and being around in nature and going for a walk on dirt or grass versus walking on concrete does different things to your body.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely.
Um, so um, you also do some other ways to connect with nature. You offer some groups that go off of like the lunar cycle, some of that stuff. Tell us about how you stumbled into that or why that was important to you and to include in your practice.
Yeah, so when I started doing private practice and I started doing, individual therapy sessions, as a practitioner working for myself, I was feeling lonely and isolated. And I
Mhm.
know a lot of clients were too, but also a lot of clinicians that I'd reach out to, friends that were in the field or in similar fields. Um, there was just a lot of isolation, loneliness, lack of connection. Again, being trapped in my concrete box of a house, which is an amazing house. I love it. It's cozy. I've cultivated it with plants and all the things that I need, but I need more than that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had a friend that is a therapist in DC, and she was feeling the same way. And we were like, maybe we can create a community of healers and get together on the lunar cycle. I
Hmm.
feel very connected to the moon. I know there's research on how the moon impacts nature, our bodies, different things. I don't know what it all is,
Sure.
like, but I love it and I feel connected to it. And so that's how we decided that we would meet on the lunar cycles. So we first started with a full moon celebration, and this was a time to celebrate successes, set intentions for the next month. It's super convenient that it's basically every month you get a new moon.
Hmm.
And we use that as a time to kind of reset, set intentions again, come together in community. We'd have a bonfire, set up tiki torches in a nice circle around us. Um, and then we invited other people in. So for our full moon celebrations, we'd invite people from everywhere, all the community, anyone who wanted to join. And we'd have wellness events scheduled into it, but also just a lot of conversation, a lot of chance to connect, to dance. We literally howl at the moon. We wait for it to
Yeah.
break through the clouds if we can, if it's a cloudy night, but at the end of our celebration, we have this nice release of howling at the moon. Um, and it's just been such an amazing way to build community and to get people out of the house. People who attend seem to really enjoy it as a release, but also as a way to connect on a deeper level. It's not just, "Let's have a party." It's, "Let's get in touch with ourselves and with each other in a really intentional manner."
Yeah.
And so it started with this full moon celebration, but then we also had our, little community of 4 healers, myself as a social worker, Nicole, a social worker in DC, Shadi, a nutritionist, does, like, yoga things, meditation, mindfulness, and, a lot of creative expression for healing, and then Melody, who's a pharmacist. And we've come together to create this little community that puts on the full moon celebrations, and then each month we also do a new moon celebration with just the 4 of us,
Hmm.
where we do a lot of reflective and deeper personal work, shadow
Sure.
work, looking at, things like journaling more, and just connecting on a deeper level.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I work with religious trauma and see a lot of people who are coming out of high control religion. And one of the things that's really grounding for people is nature. I
Mhm.
grew up fundamentalist, and like nature for me was important, but connecting to the pagan community for me was really, I would say, got me through the pandemic in a certain way, because all these people who like-minded were connecting with nature. The wheel of the year, I have 2 little boys, is what we use now to celebrate holidays, as opposed to the religion I was raised in. And like tracking the moon, knowing the moon cycles, knowing what the different moons are. Like, again, I think that paradigm for there's a sequence, there's an ebb and flow, but everything keeps kind of moving is
Mm.
healthier than the like, it's a Monday and that means you're working 9 to 5. Like, that's all arbitrary and not based on anything. Whereas connecting to nature, you're getting this feedback of like, right, we're connecting, we're connecting, we're connecting.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Whether it's the moon cycles, whether it's other aspects of nature, it it feels more authentic to me, and I don't know the different, meanings of the different moons, and it's just something that I feel a deep connection to
Yeah.
personally, and I enjoy sharing with other people. And it's been a great learning experience too, because we do, as we're doing these things, do a little bit of research here and there and learn a little
Mhm.
more about different cycles of the earth, the planet, the moon, the stars, the
Yeah.
nature cycles. I've been learning a lot, also, but most of it for me has come from a place of, I feel an authentic connection to nature. I feel an authentic connection to the moon and water and fire and the different elements. And I don't know what any of it is or what it means. but I'm gonna embrace it because this is what I find meaning in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the meaning-making component of it, of that there's an authentic, genuine response to a stimuli, and what we do with that's kinda open-ended, and I
Mhm.
find that is empowering for people, a little bias here coming out of a high control religion, like, for people who have been told what to do, there's a right and wrong way to do everything.
Mhm.
There's a real, freedom and empowerment in if you wanna learn the moon cycles, you can, but you don't have to. You can just appreciate a bright moon and the nice stars and get out in nature more. Like, that's great if that works well for you, and if you're somebody who wants to connect and know what the strawberry blood moon means or whatever. I'm a bad pagan, I don't know all these things yet. But, like, there's levels of, right, what do you wanna connect to? What feels genuine and authentic to you? And that's an option as opposed to, this is the only way to interact with nature. Like,
Right.
that isn't a thing.
Yeah, yeah, you don't have to know all that's the magic of nature is you don't have to know all the facts or the phases or the different things if you wanna connect. Even in the training, they talk about, spirituality and nature. Whether
Mhm.
you look, back to indigenous people from various parts of the world and how they connected to the moon and stars and nature in different ways and celebrated, those connections, or if you just go out in nature on your own and take an awe walk and find
Yeah.
awe and wonder and gratitude in the world, that can bring so much connection. Just looking even I live in the middle of the city. I can still walk down the street and find awe and wonder in the fact that there's one singular tree and a bird found that tree and made a nest,
Mhm.
or that this weed has popped up between the cracks in the sidewalk. Like, that's wild.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
sidewalk is impermeable. I can't get through it. How did this weed do this? And it's really cool. And so you don't have to know everything to be
Yeah.
able to find that spirituality in nature or just connection or
It's
awe.
okay to not know the difference between a silver maple and an oak tree. Like, you can still go and enjoy time in the forest.
Right. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So, if therapy's walking out in nature, what does self-care look like for you? How do you kind of take care of your own mental wellness while working in the field?
Yeah, so, a lot of it is nature for me, um, which, I mean, it seems kind of self-explanatory at that point, but I do, um, try to get outside every single day, regardless of the weather. I mean, the research says take a 20-minute walk every single day.
Yeah.
Rain or shine, the sun is still coming through to some degree, and movement is good. So I do that. Knowing the research does help me do that more because on days where I'm like, whatever, I can check in with my nature therapist brain and
Yeah.
be like, no, actually, let's do this. Um, but self-care also looks like, aside from hiking, backpacking, being outside, I play soccer. I like to do a lot of things with movements. I'm very playful and
Mhm.
I find I can focus better while I'm moving and while I'm doing something. So I do things like acro yoga, which is a great way to connect with other people where you're like climbing on top of each other. And with the people I do acro yoga with, it's a lot of giggling and enjoying the mess ups and just having fun with it. I've been trying to take up hula hooping. I also like to do things like baking and cooking, making bread, especially in the winter. Once fall comes, I call it baking season. It's finally not too hot to turn the oven on.
Yeah.
And I fully enmesh myself in that. I'm wintering right now, which is a new term that I've learned and still learning about, which goes back to that hibernation. I let
Mhm.
myself rest. I have candles and cozy blankets. So right now for me, self-care is, sitting on the couch with a good book or just enjoying the smell of my candles, having pretty lights up, um, baking, cooking, doing jigsaw puzzles, some amount of journaling and things like that.
Mhm.
Another piece is that community of healers that I told you about. I turn to them for support of a lot of things we do. Um, our new moon celebrations every month. Next weekend, we're actually doing a little mini retreat. And this time with these people is more than just let me hang out with friends, which is self care in itself, also.
Right.
But it's a very intentional time with guided activities that we create for and with each other, to take time to reflect, to journal, to help each other in our own healing processes, get together to talk about business stuff at separate times, not during our healing times, because those
Yeah.
are special and unique to us. Um, Self care can look like dancing around the house and putting music on at random times. Sometimes I just, like, shake my body and try to, like, get whatever negativity I might be feeling, I just literally, like, shake my arms and stomp my feet, or lay on the ground. I
Yeah.
mean, self-care to me is so there's it's so wide, there's so many different things. Um, Go get my nails done. I'm not a
Mhm.
very fancy person, but, like, sitting there and having the meditative space of someone doing my nails for me is really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love all of this because I think part of the podcast is normalizing that everyone has to work on their mental health.
Mhm,
Um, but part of it too is like the intentionality behind some of these things. As therapists, we take on a lot of other people's stress in addition to our own stress. And so normalizing that, like, right, as stress levels go up, stress relief has to go up. But
mhm,
some of this playfulness and some of these things of, I would guess slightly, if not a lot different than your first or second year out of grad school. Like that
mhm.
that the way that we relate to ourselves and how we take care of ourselves as healers changes over time as well.
Definitely. Yeah, and one thing I notice, that I do clinical supervision for s social workers at lower license level, and one of the most recent things that came up was the necessity of self-care, the intensity of self-care at different points. There
Mhm.
are times when my life is smooth, things are good, I feel good. I go into therapy sessions, it feels natural and easy. My supervisee has even said, like, "How can I justify getting paid for this? This just feels so natural."
Yeah.
And then our lives take turns. As therapists, like, I still go through things,
Mhm.
and when things are good, my self-care might be minimal or natural, or I don't even notice that I'm doing it because it's not urgent. But
Mhm.
then there are other times where I'm doing self-care from the time I wake up until the time I go to bed around my sessions,
Yeah.
and it's really intensive because I need to be in a space for my clients, but I also need to be in that space for myself.
Yeah. And I think checking in with yourself enough to set the intentionality around what it needs to
Mhm.
look like, because when we are good and we have lots of resources naturally, we need less intentionality around it. And when we are dealing with a lot, or we have a lot of things that are consuming resources, then we need to be intentional, create that space.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And that's what we tell all our clients, but we have to do it. We have to do it too.
Yeah, which is a learning process as a therapist to remind myself when I need to take care of myself. It's gets easier with years of experience. Well, easier. Gets easier to remind myself to do it with years of
Right.
experience.
Yeah.
Implementing it is, as challenging as whatever the situation is, but
Yeah.
I know
Yeah,
it.
and I love like nature's so connected for that because it's easy to, as therapists, intellectualize or go to the research or go to the data and say, "Oh yeah, self-care, check that box," but like then we don't always do it. And so
Mm,
I find like nature again, like take a walk, like take a lunch break, go outside. Like
yeah,
it's stuff that we as therapists know, but it's easy to get consumed with case notes or, calling an insurance that is declining something or whatever. And there's these things. So, yeah, I love the intentionality of it. I love how nature
mhm.
yanks us out of a lot of those mind frames that are unhelpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and reminds me like those nature metaphors, it reminds me of the phases. It reminds me that it's okay to take a break, that life will continue. I'll go on, things will go on. If I don't call that insurance company, I might be delayed in getting paid. But, you know, in nature therapy, we talk about being safe enough, comfortable enough, okay enough. And if I'm, for example, making enough money because it is a capitalistic society, I do have to pay my darn bills. Like, that's just the thing.
Yeah.
um, but I can decide, I need a lot of self-care right now. I have this insurance company to call, but I don't have the capacity right now. I'm going to lay on the floor for the next 5 minutes between sessions, or, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to go
Mhm.
stare up at the leaves, go out on my deck in the backyard, like whatever it is, to
Yeah.
get space and take care of myself. And that insurance company is going to be there next week or next month or whenever I
Right.
have the capacity to get back to that.
Yeah. And knowing that investment of time comes back to us, we're more efficient. We have an office dog where I work, and like sometimes the best use of my time is petting the dog in between sessions. Like that's
Mhm,
what grounds me and recenters me faster than anything else. So like right, that intentional investment of time comes back to us.
mhm. Exactly, yeah. If you don't wanna waste time, then you need to spend time intentionally doing something different potentially.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Uh, Jenn, this was awesome. If people want to learn more about you, I know you did like a wintering clinic's the wrong word. What's the word I'm looking for? Like a
Workshop type thing.
yeah, you did a wintering workshop I saw. So if people want to follow you or learn more about your practice or connect with you, perhaps where can they find you? Where do they get information?
Yeah, so my website is www.jensowers.com. I imagine you can put that in the show notes so they can find
We
it.
will. We will link everything. But
Link
so for
everything up.
my
Um,
auditory processors who want to listen to it.
yeah, but my name spelling is JENNSOWERS. So it's just www.jensowers.com. That's the best way to just check up on things. I'll post my groups and events, the full moon celebrations again next weekend. Or I guess maybe it's 2 weekends from now still. My little community of healers is getting together. So we'll be scheduling out our new moons and full moon celebrations for people to be able to look out for. I will randomly post virtual events. If people are interested in virtual events, it'll show up on my website.
Mhm.
If you go to my website, you can also sign up for my email newsletter. It's just easiest to do everything through the website, though, or send me an email, wellness@jensowers.com. Um, and then I'll get back to you and also send links for, you know, my Eventbrite, my
Yeah.
website, my all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're on Instagram. I know that's
Oh,
how I know the I knew the wintering workshop was happening. I wasn't able to make it, but seeing that. And so we'll link to that as well.
yeah, so
Um,
both social medias, wellness with Jenn Sowers, because there's someone else who also is wellness with Jen in some other state, whose pages look fascinating also, but I
sure.
don't know that person.
We're gonna get all the wellness with J names together at some point.
Wellness with Jen, wellness with Jenn Sowers, wellness with Jer, who knows?
But yeah, and for those of you who like are maybe interested in this, whether you're a therapist or a social worker or just a random person who's like, oh yeah, I never thought about a full moon ceremony or anything like that. Like, I strongly encourage it. This is a little bit of my like pagan coming out, but like, it's so cool to connect with these things. I'm in the Milwaukee area. There's a group that meets at the outdoor sculpture garden, and they walk through a labyrinth, and like it's just this magical experience to be able to connect with nature and then connect with other people who are connecting with nature. Like it's very cool. So if this at all piques your interest, like I highly recommend it. As the wintering workshop was super easy. It wasn't able to attend, but like you said, you got links to sign up for all that stuff. So
Mm,
we'll have all that stuff in the show notes for people. So,
yeah.
Jenn, this has been fantastic. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back again next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.